Do you have an interest in recording but don't know where to start? Unsure about what goes into a home studio or how to get a professional sound? This podcast will help you achieve a professional quality recording while working with a limited budget. Sound travels through a path called a signal chain. It is important to choose gear wisely when assembling a home studio.
For a home studio application, probably versatility. I mean, if I'm going out for a piece of equipment, it's going to be very dependent upon the project and what I want to accomplish. I mean, if I'm going to buy a piece of equipment for my home studio, I'm going to make sure that I can use it across multiple different things, and I'm also going to make sure that the piece of gear pays for itself, you know.
It begins with microphones and audio cables.
You can get a $200 microphone that sounds phenomenal. You can get a $2,000 microphone that sounds phenomenal. I guess with that, you kind of need to just go from personal review. You need to just test them out, and you can't say, this must sound like crap because it's cheap, because sometimes cheap mics sound great. Most things I buy so that they will be versatile, but then there are a couple certain things that I know can give me a certain specific sound, and I buy those for those sounds only. Like, example, the Audix D6. It is far from the most versatile kick drum mic, but it is the punchiest kick drum mic you can buy. So if you want a punchy rock sound, I've got that. But then I also have an AKG D112 so that I can use it for a versatile kick drum mic if I want a jazz sound or something like that. For affordable stuff, the MXL mics are good. They're far from the best, but they're very, very good.
You know, 57s, there's SM58s. The Shure series, because they're mainly a live sound company, and they also do studio microphones, you'll find they're at a lower price point than like a Neumann. AKG, for instance, makes a series like the C1000, the C3000 that are very good like home studio mics. I think it's important too to realize too that it's not necessarily the piece of gear, it's what you're trying to do. I mean, number one, train your ears and know what you're doing, and then number two, have a good source. If you got that, you can put a 57, which is an $89 mic, on anything and it's going to sound good. Yeah, so it is very important to make sure your cables are matched up equally with the rest of your gear. It's going to be a weak point in your chain, you know, so it definitely is worth it to go out and purchase a Hosa, Mogami, Canary cable, something like that.
The preamp boosts the incoming signal and sets the record level.
There are $99 preamps that sound great. There are $4,000 preamps that sound great, and they all have their own different characteristics, you know. So, mic, preamp, A to D converter, workstation. The rest of it nowadays can all be handled through plugins and stuff like that, and you don't need to spend a bunch of money on output equipment if you don't have it.
The compressor reduces the dynamic range of a signal by a set ratio.
I've got a couple pieces of really expensive gear. I've got a Universal Audio 610 preamp, I've got a 6176, and I've got a distressor. Those three are supposed to be like top of the line, best pieces of gear there are. But better than the 6176, which is a preamp compressor unit, better than that, I like the M-Audio Tampa, which is a $300 unit compared to the 6176, which is about $2,000. I like that better, it just sounds better. In terms of gear that I really love, 90% of the stuff I do right now is in the box because what I do mostly is mixing. But the M-Audio Tampa, phenomenal sounding for vocals.
There are incredible plugins nowadays. There are also incredible pieces of outboard like that we have here that you're never going to match with the plugin. For a home studio, plugins work just fine. But you will find that a lot of your major records are done using a lot of outboard equipment. You know, a lot of your old, you know, classic type compressors like 1176s and the LA2As, and then there's other people that like the GM LEQs, and they're like, you know, Focusrite pieces of gear, or Tube Tech, or Pultec. Like all these really spendy pieces of gear are used on these major projects. But again, if you're looking to do a home studio, you don't necessarily need all that equipment.
Analog to digital converters translate sound into digital information by sampling signal thousands of times per second.
Whatever you're using on the front end to get that stuff into the digital world, because most people I think at home nowadays are going to work on a workstation anyway, your A to D converter becomes very important. So whether you choose to go with a DigiDesign system or whether you choose to go with something like a Motu system or something like that, you got to make sure that that transfer from the analog world into the digital world is as high of quality as possible.
Once converted, the signal is recorded, edited, and mixed in a digital audio workstation.
You know, there are all of these opinions out there on what sounds better as far as a digital audio workstation. But again, I think it's really the engineer's preference as far as what they like to use. And the second thing is you got to just remember what you're doing. So, and I mean remember what you're doing, not in the software, but remember what you're doing, and that it doesn't matter if I'm using Pro Tools or Nuendo. If I'm trying to make a record, you know, what is going to enable me to make that record easiest and get the kind of sound out of it I want. For me, I've been using Pro Tools for so long that Pro Tools is the one, and it inhibits me the least as far as a creative process.
In general, Cubase is actually my favorite to work on. I at least previously found it completely intuitive and very easy to use, and generally sounds good. I don't think the actual audio engine in it sounds as good as what's in Pro Tools, so when you're actually mixing down, it doesn't sound as good. But in terms of, you know, just ease of use, that's phenomenal. The automation is really easy on it.
Nowadays, it's like, I like Nuendo or I like Pro Tools. You better be prepared to work in all these different things, but as far as your own projects, work on whatever one you like.
The two most important parts of making a good record would be, first of all, the engineer, and second of all, the speakers. Because you can have a cheap set of speakers, but if you know how to read them, like what they sound like, you can do phenomenal things with them. So those two need to work hand in hand. And having a really, quote-unquote, good sounding set of speakers is not necessarily good for a recording. If you have a set of speakers that sounds good on everything, it's not really translating accurately what you're doing.
I mean, I think the first thing is education. The second thing is trusting your ears and trying to get whatever piece of gear you're using to adapt to these.
If you're talking about recording, one of the most important things in that is actually the room itself. So as much as it may be, I only have a closet to record in, you need to treat the closet, you know, put in soundproofing and stuff.
Engineers nowadays need to, even though that the stuff is so accessible, educate themselves on proper mixing environments. You know, it's not whether to use this compressor on this instrument and this mic on that instrument. It's just like educate yourself on sound and music and where this stuff came from, you know.